Yes? Excellent. Welcome to our Backpack to Briefcase session, How to Write a Compelling Graduate Statement. My name is Sue Pryor. I'm the manager for alumni development here at UTM. I'm also a very proud graduate. I'm going to introduce to you someone from the Career Center who's going to give you just a few points on what's happening at the Career Center and what's available to you, and then we'll get on to our guest speaker. Sorry, her name is Peggy.
Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Peggy Scuda. Can you hear me? Smile if you can hear me. Good. Okay, I see a lot of familiar faces here. See some new faces. I just want to remind you about the Career Center. How many in this room have been to the Career Center? Okay, we need more people coming to the Career Center. You can find us on this floor, just down the hall past the cop shop. So please visit us. And I also wanted to let you know that we're available to graduates until 2 years after you graduate. So if you graduate this year, you can still use our services for 2 years. If you're thinking about grad school, we can talk to you about grad school. We can help you figure out what you want to do with your life, what direction you might want to go by figuring out who you are. We can also help you with employment strategy, finding work, writing resumes, interviewing for grad school. We do a lot of that kind of thing as well. And I know you're doing personal statements today, which is, I'm sure it's gonna be fabulous, but I want to let you know that we also have a personal statement module, which you can find on the Career Center website under further education. Look for resources and links. So once you look at that module, it takes about 15 minutes to go through. It'll help you put together a first draft, help you organize your thoughts as to what you want to put in your personal statement. And then once you've done that and you feel that you've got something worthwhile looking at, you can use our services and we'll critique your personal statement, and you can come see us at least 4 times until you get it to the shape that you want it in. So hopefully we'll see you in the next couple of weeks. For those who are graduating this year and those who are about to graduate maybe a year from now, remember us. We're here to help you. Your success is our success. So that sounds so cliche, I know, but it's true. Okay, so I'll talk to you later, and good luck to you.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Teo Salgado. I have had the privilege and honor to have known Teo for over 25 years. We were both student leaders here at UTM, and we have stayed in touch. That's what happens at university. You meet your best friends and you stay in touch forever, and then you get them to come back and do these kinds of things for us. Teo is an independent educational consultant based in Toronto. He is a highly regarded higher education professional with nearly 20 years of experience in international student recruitment, admissions counseling, and alumni relations at the University of Toronto and Western. Teo is a member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, co-chair of the 2020 Higher Education Consultants Association National Conference, Higher Education Consultants Association, National Association for College Admission Counseling, and International Association for College Admission Counseling. Teo is a graduate of the University of Toronto, UTM, yay, McGill University, and University of California, Los Angeles. Grad certification in college counseling. Please welcome Teo Salgado.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sue, for that introduction. Everybody can hear me, right? Yes? Okay, excellent. You know, I'm really overwhelmed by the response to this talk, but I guess I really shouldn't be, because if there's one thing that I know from my experience at the University of Toronto is that a lot of students who come here are thinking beyond their first degree. And I also know that this is the time of year when students start thinking about graduate applications. In fact, before people started filtering in, I was editing a couple of essays that I'm working on for my students. It really is a pleasure to be here. I tell my students all the time that they need to get involved, that they need to do volunteer work, that they need to do things in their community. So this is, you know, just to show that I don't just say it. I actually really do it and have been doing it for a while. because I did that when I was a student here at the University of Toronto. So thank you all for coming. Before we get rolling, I just want to get a sense of what year you're in. So those of you who are in first year, can you raise your hands? Awesome. Thank you for, hey, I know you. Yeah, hey, thanks for coming, Tiago. Yeah, Tiago, I met Tiago because I did some volunteer work for UTM, and he's one of the new students, so from Brazil, right? Excellent. And second year students. Yes, okay, great. A couple of second year students. Fabulous to see those of you coming in earlier. One of the things that you'll notice as we go through this presentation is that advanced preparation is really required for writing a compelling statement. So thank you for getting started early. How many third year students? Awesome, awesome. And then the rest, raise your hands, fourth year. Okay, very good. So the pressure's on, you wanna know how to write it, right? Okay, good. So it was working until now. Jermaine, maybe it's the battery. There we go. Okay, perfect. So the first thing we need to talk about is what are some of the reasons that you're thinking about going to grad school? So can you tell me, maybe raise your hand if you have an idea of why it is that you want to go to grad school? Maybe the fourth year students? Yes. Okay. Okay, great. So implement the knowledge that you have because it's a bit more practical. So you're looking for a practical application of your knowledge. Okay, good. Any other ideas? Yes, back there. To do more research with more resources, right? And both of those are really good reasons. So, you know, one of them could be that you have a passion for a topic or an unusual combination of topics, and maybe you want to do more research into that area. The other could be that you just like going to school and you're good at it, right? That's certainly the reason that a lot of students go to grad school. It's mentioned, right, that you want to apply what you've learned and you want to have access to more resources. So you enjoy doing research. That could be another good reason for going to grad school. Then you also maybe have there we go. All right. There's some really great construction going on around campus. It looks beautiful. I'm sure they're doing a good job upstairs too. So, you know, another could be because the career that you're going into requires you to have a graduate degree. And it's certainly one of the things that you see now increasingly, right? You get more and more careers that really require you to do something beyond a first degree. Sometimes it's just as easy as I want to get better pay, right? And in order to do so, I need a degree. And then, of course, you also want to ensure continued career advancement because not only do you need a graduate degree to get in, but potentially they require it in order to get a promotion, right? I certainly see that from a lot of students that are applying to LLM degrees or MBA degrees, right? Their career requires them to have additional pay. And often, which was my case, right? You just wanted to have a more fulfilling life. For me, it was more about understanding a topic that I was very interested in. And I just wanted to study a little bit more politics, right? So some of the reasons why you shouldn't do graduate school are because you want to please others, right? Because mom and dad think you have to go to grad school, or because your friends are going off to grad school, so maybe you should too, right? Or if you're undecided about what it is that you want to study, it's okay to put this off until you have a sense of what it is that you want to study, right? Then, of course, if you're simply thinking about going into graduate program because you think that that's going to be the ticket to get you the job that you want, that's not really a good reason to apply, right? So, you know, if you're unsure about what it is that you want to do in your career or what your academic plans are, Think about these questions. When were you most excited about your studies? What excited you while you were at undergrad, right? What were the things that really got you interested in studying? The things that you didn't mind staying up all night, to study for an exam for, or to write that paper because you really got into it. Is there a career that you would do for free or maybe for little or no pay, right? Is there something that you enjoy doing so much that it kind of feels like play, right? And that's one of the ways that you know that you enjoy something a lot and that it's maybe something that you could see yourself doing for a long time. The other is, of course, who do you admire? And what do they do for a living, right? Would you want to do that kind of thing? So think about those questions when you're thinking about, what you want to do as your next step in your academic career or in your professional career. This is the process of applying to graduate schools is really going to take a long time. There are a lot of steps that you have to take in order to submit an application. So it's very, very time consuming. It really is going to require a lot of work on your part. And if there's one thing that I can stress, and that's why I'm really pleased to see that there were some students here that are in first year, second year, and even third year, right, that are thinking a little bit further ahead, right, is that it's important to do that because this process really requires you to plan ahead, right, to make sure that you have everything that you need done earlier in order to have a relatively stress-free application. So the first thing, of course, that you have to do is you have to create and manage online application accounts. So, when you were applying to universities in Ontario, the process was fairly easy, right? It was, you went to the OUAC application and you completed your applications there, right? When you're applying to graduate programs, it isn't that easy, right? You're often having to go to different university websites and applying through them, right? If you're applying to graduate programs in different parts of the world, you're going to have to learn different terminology. You're going to have to go to different websites in order to create your accounts and keep on top of those deadlines, which may be different from the ones in our own province. You also have to draft, rewrite, and polish statements, right? It was, you probably noticed that the Career Center mentioned that they give you up to 4 rewrites, right? That you can go in and it really is going to take that much. Right? Don't think that this is something that you can write the night before, like you're writing probably a lot of your essays, right? It's still the same, right? It was like that 25 years ago. I'm sure it's the same. So this is going to take a couple of drafts, right? And I often tell my students that it's best they do a draft, they sit on it, and then come back to it, right? I go back to my blogs each year. And one of the things that I notice is that, what I wrote last year isn't good enough this year. When I'm editing papers or draft essays that were written by my students, I will leave it for at least a day and go back to it after my first draft, like my first review. Because what I caught the first time may not necessarily be what I catch the second time. So it's really important for you to give yourself a lot of time. And also, of course, you have to plan for any tests that may be required for the programs that you're applying to, right? Is the MCAT required? Is there a GMAT? Do you have a GRE requirement, right? So you have to think about all those things. And these tests aren't necessarily offered on the same timelines, right? Or on your timeline. So you have to make sure that you're going to be able to get your studying done in advance before you sign up for those tests. You also have to plan to forward results to universities. And these can take time. Right? Processing those documents takes time. So you have to give yourself a buffer to make sure that things arrive on time. You also have to talk to professors about letters of recommendation. Now, those of you who are in 4th year, how many of you have already spoken to your professor about letters of recommendation? Okay, super. So at least half of you, right? That's really good. The other half, when you leave this room, beeline it to your professor's office. Right? Because you have to, and I'm actually joking because there's a lot of stuff that you have to do before you actually request the reference letter. But the point is that you really need to do it as soon as possible. And I'll touch on that shortly. You're also going to have to send, transcripts to universities. And you're also going to, some programs will encourage you to connect with faculty before you apply, right? So that you have to connect with them. You have to write them. They have to write you back. And you know that sometimes that takes a little bit of a while, right? You may also be encouraged to visit the university, to have an interview with people at the program, to learn more about the program, right? To establish that there's a good match between you and the program. So the application process takes a long time, right? So I've given you here a couple of questions that just as a way for you to think about the kind of things that are typically asked by universities. And I think that these will give you a sense that a lot of the writing that you're going to be doing is actually a summary of what you should have been doing over the last 3 years, right? And this is why I stress the need to prepare in advance. So for example, McGill Desautels, they ask, describe a challenge you have faced either professionally or academically, and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. What did you learn from it, right? So the assumption is, right, of course, there's a challenge, right? But the assumption is that something that you've done in your life has changed the way you are today, right? And often these challenges come through the things that we're involved in, right? The activities that we do. Maybe it's research that we're doing outside of our regular studies, or maybe it's volunteer work that we're doing, right? And you learn things that can then help you write this, right? Because it's professional or academic challenge. It's not a personal challenge. While pursuing your MBA studies, what steps do you believe you need to take in order to achieve your career goals, right? So again, you have to think in advance. Where is this getting, like, where am I going? And how is this program going to help me get where I'm going, right? So before you start writing, you need to think about how this program specifically lines up with your long-term goals, right? As concisely as possible, please explain why you intend on pursuing your MBA studies at this time. So very similar to the previous question, they just want to know why it is that you're doing it. The Stanford Design Impact, it's an engineering program. And Stanford really requires you to get to know what the program is about before you answer that question, right? So it requires a lot of upfront research, right, on the program before you go on to writing the statement. So don't think that it's something that you can just jump into and write. You really need to do a lot of prep. U of T's IME program. Why are you interested in the program? And the second part of that question is about a good fit and how it matches your career goals, right? So very similar to that MBA question, you got to think about how this makes sense to you, right? And why it would make sense for them to admit you to the program. NYU, public administration. They're asking about specific values, experiences, and accomplishments that have shaped who you are. So again, they want to get to know you, and they want to get a sense of what you have done that aligns nicely with the program that you're applying to. So I have an interesting story about this program. I had a student apply to this now 3 years ago. This was a student who did, she was amazing, right? In many ways, she did a lot of the things that I did. So that makes me amazing. No, no, but she really was. She was involved in student government. She did a lot of volunteer work in her community. She had really good grades, right? You would think that that kind of student would be a shoo-in for this type of program, right? Except that one of the things that she should have done earlier, right? This is why, those of you in third year, second year, first year have a bit of a head start. What she should have done was gotten a sense for what the profile of the student who was being admitted to this program was, right? So it turns out that she did some really great volunteer work that had a local impact. But then when you looked at the type of students that were getting into this program, the profile of the student was one of a student who was having an impact more at the national and at the state level, right? It's an American program, so at the state level, right? So if you're thinking about applying to a program, right? Take a look at what the typical student does, right? Because if your profile doesn't match what other applicants are providing, then it's going to be an uphill battle, right? So you need to, for those of you who are in third year, second year, and first year, you can start doing that today because you have time, right? So if you know what the goal is for the types of programs that you're interested in applying to, it's going to be a lot easier for you to work your way back and do all the kind of things that you need to do today, right, in order to get into that program 2, 3, 4 years from now, right? So the advanced planning bit is really, really critical. She ended up being okay. She ended up going into public administration also at University of Southern California, right? But it just wasn't the program where she wanted to be in primarily, right? So, you know, there's 3 maxims of graduate admissions. One is that fit and match trump grades and scores, right? So making sure that there's a good alignment between you and the program to which you're applying can sometimes make the difference if you're admitted or not, right? So it isn't always just about the scores and the grades. It's also about whether you would be a good fit for the program. The other is specificity plus flexibility leads to admission. So knowing what you want to do, but being flexible enough to realize that today you don't necessarily know what exactly you're going to be doing, and you're willing to allow the program to take you where you may go, right? So, but having a clear sense of what you want to do, but at the same time remaining flexible, right? And then the other one is capacity plus passion leads to admission. I actually don't like the word passion, and it's really interesting. I had a talk with 2 professors on Friday. They're senior professors at U of T. And one of the things that they said to me is that one of the things that makes them tired is when they see the word passion in personal statements, right? Because every student that they get an application from says they have a passion for whatever the subject is, right? So if you're writing about passion, don't mention it, right? Just show it, right? Show that you have an interest in the area. Maybe purpose might be a better word, right? That this is something that you're meant to do. So capacity. So you need to have an interest in the subject, but you also need to have the ability, right? The ability to perform and to do the work in the program. So when you start thinking about what it is that you're going to write about, here's some good questions to think about. You know, what thinkers and which articles in your field most influence the development of your thought? So basically, you know, who are your influences, right? How is it that you've gotten to where you want to go, and why is it that you want to study this area? Potentially, it was these people that influenced your thought, right? That's leading you to apply to this program, but then also specifically potentially to the program at the university that you're considering. Who are your favorite professors and why, right? How have they influenced you? The other is, you know, what is the best paper or exam you ever wrote in your primary area of study? So like maybe your specialist, right? Or the major that you intend to apply to. You know, what made it good, right? Was it the topic that you were writing on? Was it the amount of research that you did, right? Was it that you were really, really interested in it? Then what is the single most important concept that you've learned at university, right? And I think that can maybe get you thinking about some of the program areas that you maybe want to apply to. You know, what's motivating you to apply? You know, how has your interest evolved? Can you identify specific milestones, right? If you ask me, yes, I can tell you, number one, why I decided to do an undergraduate study at U of T in Latin and American politics, right? It was because my family came from Nicaragua, a country that was in the 70s destroyed by a civil war, and my family had to flee. So I wanted to understand the forces that led me to first Miami and then to Toronto, right? That was the reason I did that. Then I did my graduate studies in political science, and I specialized in refugee policy making because, you know, my family fled a really horrible situation. So it's, it makes sense when you're applying and you're writing a graduate program, if you can tie in those personal things, right? And explain how that, and maybe the professors that you ran into along the way, or the readings that you've written, okay, led you to applying to this program, right? In the sciences, it could be, an illness in the family that kind of got you thinking, this is something that I want to work on, right? So, what extracurricular experiences influenced your career direction, right? What are some of the things that you did here? Because certainly in my case, right, the reason I'm still working at universities and doing this kind of thing today is because I was involved in student government, and I got to become really familiar with universities. So that kind of sparked my path, and I've seen it a lot with other student leaders that I've met and that I've worked with as students. What experiences contributed to your interest in grad studies, right? Was it the fact that maybe you saw a mismatch between what you were reading about in the books and what your experience was in the workplace, right? And then you just kind of thought, what is going on here? Why does this not make sense? It isn't what I was taught in school, right? So instead of saying, which we often hear, school was good for nothing. It didn't teach me what I needed to know in the workplace. In fact, they taught me the wrong thing, because that's not the way it works. It's actually a space for you to do further research, to explain why the theory isn't nicely aligning with the experience, right? So potentially there are some opportunities for further research. What role has your family played in this choice, right? So you got to think about that too. Are you doing it simply because your family is asking you to do something like this, right? Go on and be a doctor is what I hear all the time, right? Or you want to be an engineer or a lawyer, always, right? And if that's the reason you're doing it, well, we talked about that earlier. It might not be a good enough reason, right? But you want to make sure that your motivation for doing it is really, self-driven, right? The other is, how have you prepared for graduate school, right? Those of you who are in third year, when you get to fourth year, you're going to have an option to do potentially a capstone project, right? Or an essay course. I recommend that you do those, right? Because those offer really great opportunities for you to learn about the research process by working one-on-one with a professor. And at the end, you'll also have some research that you're going to be able to submit if the program that you apply to requires you to sample of written work, right? It's also really great experience that you can write about. What body of relevant knowledge do you offer? Like, what have you studied? Is it related to what it is that you're going to study, right? So I had a student last year who was applying to art history. She didn't study art history, right? What she studied was classics. But what she wanted to focus on in art history was very much related to classics. So the spin that we took on her writing was that. Now, how do we position what I learned in classics and the fact that I want to study art history, right? So it doesn't always have to be that you've studied one thing and you go right into it. Sometimes it's just that there's other relevant stuff that you've done. What study or laboratory skills have you worked on to date, right? Those of you who are applying to science programs, right? Biochemistry? No? Yeah. Molecular biology, right? Molecular biology. Have you done some research? Have you been working in a professor's lab? What skills did you learn as a result of that, right? Those are the kind of things that are going to really set you apart from students who are applying to a similar program, have the book knowledge, but don't have the lab experience, right? Because that's really, really important. So if you're not already doing lab work and you're thinking of applying to a program that really requires you to have some lab experience, again, make sure that you connect with your professors, right? That you express that you have interest in getting involved in their research. And if they can't help you, right? Because sometimes labs are just, they're full, right? Maybe ask if they can recommend other labs that you can look into, or, even at hospitals. to see if there's opportunities there. What personal qualities will help you succeed? So sometimes the questions will be such that they want to get to know a little bit more about, whether you have what it takes to overcome challenges that are inevitably going to come as you're working on the program. So, when you're writing these essays, be prepared to name drop. So who are some of your influential undergraduate professors, right? That's part of the reason that you came to U of T potentially, because you knew that there were professors who are leaders in their field working here, right? So if you can apply and get a reference from some of those professors, that's really great, because they're probably known to people in other committees, right, that are doing the hiring. Do you have any professors to target at the schools that interest you? Have you maybe met them at the different conferences that maybe you've attended, and have you kept in touch with them, right? So, make sure that when you're thinking about what you want to do next, right, think about the projects that you're starting today that will help you with applications that you're going to write 2 years or 1 year from now or a couple of months from now, right? Make sure that your projects, the work that you're doing, aligns nicely so that it makes sense to the readers why it is that you're applying to a specific program. If you aren't already doing this, right, make sure that you look out for opportunities to present at conferences or to go to meetings of the profession that you're interested in, and seeing if there's a way for you to present. So, you've done this before, right? It's not new. So it's, you did this when you were in high school. You were writing character sketches in English class, right? How many of you had to do a Iago or Macbeth? And, right? I think most of us did at some point. But now, instead of writing about some Shakespearean character, what you're doing is you're writing about yourself. So you have to ask questions about yourself. What interests me? What are my goals? What is it like to be me? And, what are my strengths and weaknesses, right? And if you have some weaknesses, figure out a way to work on those and explain how you've been working on those if required in those statements. And make sure that you read and reread the question, right? The same thing as when you're writing an exam or a test, make sure that you're actually answering the question that was asked, right? So just take your time. Don't just jump into it. Your responses, the structure is going to be very similar, right? And I think that the Career Center, by giving you a template to follow, that's in essence what they're going to do, right? Like help you figure out how to structure your statement. A beginning, a middle, and an end. But the thing is that you need to figure out, what is the theme of my statement? What is the one thing that I want the readers of this statement to leave with once they've read through it, right? So you have to figure out, what is it that you want to say about yourself? You need to be specific and provide details, right? So, the other day I was writing, I was reviewing an MBA application for a student that, she's actually a professional that was the first woman to do work in Iraq for her company, right? And there were so many things that she hadn't thought about including, because she just assumed that by giving high-level stuff, everybody would know what it is that she was talking about, right? Especially when you're using professional jargon, you can kind of get lost in that high-level stuff. Oh, yeah, they know. No, they don't, right? So you want to make sure that you give specific examples of the things that you are doing. You want to demonstrate that you've researched the program and that you've considered the reasons for applying to it, right? Why am I applying to this program? I'm applying to this program because you're good for me in this way, and I'm good for you in that way, right? So you want to be able to, it's kind of like, when you're writing a love letter, right? Do people write love letters anymore? No, probably not, right? But just read Romeo and Juliet. You'll see what that love letters look like. Basically you were trying to say, this is why I'm good for you, right? And this is why you're good for me. And you find those commonalities between your goals and the philosophy of the program and what they want their students to learn, right? So it's about establishing that link. And then you also want to make sure that you give some analysis about yourself and what you've learned, rather than just restating your marks and what you accomplished in school. So give your essay a theme. Some people find that giving their essay a title helps them stick to the purpose of the writing of the essay. So a topic is what you're writing about, right? Your intellectual preparation, your future goals, and the reason for choosing the program, all of those things that we talked about, right? A theme is why you're going to write, why, what is your overall message? What is it that you want them to know about you, right? So here's some of the other things. I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. I talked earlier about rushing out of here and going to your professors to ask for a reference. And you should do that. But before you do, make sure that you schedule an appointment with the professor. And when you're sending an email to ask for that appointment, mention why it is that you're asking for the appointment, right? And if you can give them a heads up about the program that you're applying to and the university that you're applying to, that's even better, because then they can prepare. Make sure that you choose professors who you know or that know you well, right? So those of you who are in first year, second year, third year, you still have time to take courses with the professor more than once, to spend a little bit of time in their office, right, during office hours. I'm sure professors are still struggling to get students to go to office class, office hours. Is that right? Right? It used to be a joke, right? Like professors would always say, I have office hours, nobody ever shows up, right? So make sure that you take advantage of that. One of the professors who wrote my references was Richard Eiton, who unfortunately isn't with us anymore, but he was one of my biggest influences. And Richard, I would pop into his office and we would talk about, Richard and I would talk about hip hop, we would talk about wrestling, right? We would talk about jazz. That was our thing. He always found a way to bring politics into it, right? But it was like a really nice, fun 30, 40 minutes with Richard when we were hanging out in his office, right? By the time I graduated, Richard really had a good sense of, why I was doing what I wanted to do, right? So make sure that you just drop by. Professors are, they're human, right? They want to talk about fun stuff too. And they also understand that sometimes they don't get the lesson just right. So if you had a section that you didn't understand, don't hesitate to go up to them and say, look, I understood what you were saying up to this point, right? Can you explain the rest to me, because I wasn't quite clear. And if you just strike up conversations like that, they would more than willingly engage with you, I'm sure, right? But do to get to know them. And don't be disappointed if a professor is unable to write you a reference, right? They're human. They have other things going on in their life, right? So it's not always about you, right? It's not that they don't want to write you a reference letter. It's maybe that the same reasons that you're asking that person to write a letter for prompted 30 other students to ask them, right? And they just don't have the bandwidth anymore to write. So the sooner you go and let them know that you want them to write a reference letter, the more likely they are to write it for you, right? They just have a lot of things going on in their lives too. If you can provide a resume or a list of activities done outside of class, right? To give them a sense of context, right? Not only did I crush your class, but I was doing it as I was doing all of these other things outside of my studies, right? Here's some of the other things that I did. So if you give them a resume, it just gives them a sense of, how involved you were in other things, and potentially how involved you were in things related to your class, right? It's really good preparation to have this kind of a list of activities anyway, because you might be able to make some links between those and the reasons why you're applying to the specific program, but it also really helps the professors to write stronger letters. Professors rely on how you did in the class to write a letter, of course. So the other thing, if you can do, is if you can give them a list of the classes that you took with them, the grades that you got, and maybe a sample of the writing, like a couple of essays that you wrote for their classes, right? That can give them something maybe to go back and say, wow, this student really developed over that year, right? And here's how their thinking evolved. They're really ready, right? So just give them as much information as you can to help them write. So the interview really, if you're required to do admission interviews, some universities will require these, the interview starts well before the meeting. So make sure that when you go in there that you, first of all, learn the program, right? What is it about the program that is a good match for you? Why are you a good match for it? Remember what you included in the resume that you submitted. And you don't want to cite it, right? What you want to know is how the things that you've done align with the reasons for applying to this specific program. And you want to make sure that you also go in there armed with a set of really good questions, right? So that leaves us 13 minutes for questions. So I think we did all right. Perfect. So maybe we'll kick it up. Okay, great. Yes. Right. So good question. How do you come out confident without sounding arrogant? It's tone, right? What I often tell my students is if you can talk about some of your accomplishments, like just give examples of them, right? You don't have to say what you want people to know. You don't want them to know, I'm a really good student, or I accomplished this. You can just tell them and give them an example of something that you did, right? So by showing them what you did, you don't have to say it in an arrogant way, right? You're showing rather than telling. And I think that that is a difference. That can really help. Yes. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, I think that that's one of those. It's a good question, but it's a question that is going to take a little bit more time to answer than like what I have, right? Because well, it's that, but also depends. So for example, if a student doesn't have like one thing that they can write about, but they have a lot of really neat things that they've done over a series of things, the structure of the essay might not be, here's the one thing that I want you to know about me, right? It might be a vignette of, like different vignettes of things that they accomplished. Yeah, right. But then what you do is you think about a unifying theme, and then you use the vignettes to explain that theme, right? So it really depends on you and what you have to say. Try going to the Career Center to see what, how that writing process that they ask you to go through can help. And I think that by talking to one of their counselors, by going through it after and just having, going through some drafts can probably get you to where you want to go. But yeah, definitely like writing 8, it's impractical. Also, you have to submit 1, right? And so you can use that 1, right? Yeah. And if ever, because this will come up too, if ever you're applying to more than one program, but it's, there's very similar, what I get my students to do is, 3 out of the 4 paragraphs are general. And then there's that one paragraph when you talk about just the specific program. That way you don't have, because the other parts can explain, give the context, right? And then that one paragraph is the one that you use to explain how you and the context align to the reason why you're applying to that program, right? Okay, no problem.
Teo, we have some questions from the online audience.
Okay.
I'm wondering, we have a question. Is there a different approach you would take with a former professor rather than a current professor?
With a former professor rather than a current professor? Yeah, I think, as I explained when you're asking for references of professors, I think that it's that much more important to remind them of how you did in the class. So if you can summarize maybe some of the discussions that you've had with them, and give them examples of writing that you did in their class, graded papers, maybe some of the feedback that they gave you, right? Like, do they still write in the margins, like in the comments section, right? So just allow them to see those so that they can see what they were thinking when they read your paper, right?
That's great. Thank you, Teo.
Mhm.
Another question we have from our online audience is, what if you want to go to a professor that you know very well for a reference, but you didn't do so great in their class?
So my question would be, why would you ask somebody that you didn't do very well in their class, right? Because you're applying to a graduate program that is going to, ask for your performance, or they're going to require a really strong reference. If you're asking the professor for a personal reference and they can talk about you as a person, that's one thing, right? But when you're applying, especially when you're applying to an academic program, what they're really interested in is your academic ability, right? They're interested in that professor's assessment of you as an academic, right? So really, you should be talking to professors that can give you a strong academic reference.
That's great. Thank you, Teo. Are there any other questions from the audience? I'm going to bring the microphone over to you so our online audience can hear. Teo, who did you pick as the next?
Right over here,
Right over here?
the lady, oh,
Oh, sorry.
and then you.
Sorry, just my question is, does it matter if the professor who's asking for the reference letter is a sessional professor or associate professor or a full professor? Thank you.
Good question. Yeah, so the question is, does it matter if the professor is a sessional professor, or a full professor? I would say yes and no. It's always better to have like a professor who is a full professor that maybe is renowned in the area to which you're applying. It'll be a much stronger reference, right? Because they are recognized. They've been to conferences and professors have gotten a sense of their scholarship, right? What they maybe were teaching you. Maybe some of the people on the committee know that professor, right? I remember when we were doing a political science class at McGill, and one of the articles that we read was about this, how in the Canadian government or Canadian studies, people tend to go between universities. So if you take a look at the departments, you'll have a lot of U of T educated professors at McGill, and then a lot of McGill educated professors at U of T, right? So chances of that professor being known by the people that are in the committee increase, right? If they're a full professor. If they're a sessional, then they don't know that professor. But more importantly, the context that they're able to write about. This student is one of the top students I've had in my 20 years of teaching, right? Is so much more powerful than, this is one of the best students that I've taught in my 3 years of teaching experience, right? But if the best you can do is to get a sessional professor to write it for you, then you got to work with what you got, right? But just know that by asking a full professor to write, you're going to have a much stronger reference. I think it was this guy here.
I actually have a follow-up to that question. So just considering references, is it best to ask professors who are currently pursuing research in their field for a reference? And then also, because something that I've noticed is that some of the professors that I've had are currently pursuing their PhD degrees. So in other words, like the highest education that they've attained is actually a master's. So they're known as usually as instructor and not doctor. Would it be a good idea to ask them for a reference as well?
I would go with a professor, like somebody who has already earned the degree. The weight of the letter is going to be much more hefty than somebody who doesn't. Right?
I have two questions.
I think you're allowed one.
Okay, all right. I have
I'm
one
just
question.
joking.
Okay, so again, following up on references. Now, some programs ask for a professional reference as an add-on. So how would I approach something like this if I did something in a professional work or a volunteer work? And the second question is, you did touch on like if I'm not sure yet which graduate program I want to go into, as maybe my field is a little bit general, and I'm looking into I just can't figure out yet which specific program to go into. What do I do when I have this situation?
Yeah, I think I'll answer the second one first, right? The second one, UT's alumni office has organized a really great, or they're organizing a really great alumni cafe, right? So that would be a great way for you to talk to people who are in the field and can give you a sense of, you know, what kind of education you might need if you want to go into the different areas that you're potentially considering, right? So that could help you narrow. And if you don't make it to the alumni cafe, then just sending out emails to people that you know, people in your network or people in your friends' networks, right? Use LinkedIn and say, I just need 15 minutes of your time, right? I'm interested in going into, introduce yourself. I'm interested in going into this. I need to talk to you for 15 minutes because I have the following questions. You know, can you give me 15 minutes? I just want to learn about how you got there. You know, just ask them about themselves, right? And you'll find that people love to talk about themselves, right? And they'll give you more than 15 minutes, right?
We're going to stop the session right here. Go on the phone. Teo, we'll hang around for a little bit if you have some questions to answer him, but we do have a gift for you, Teo. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I do want to mention the Alumni Cafe, which takes place on October 22nd at 7 p.m. in Deerfield Hall, where we will have lots of alumni that you can talk to there. It's kind of like speed mentoring. So I hope you can join us. Once again, thank you, Teo. You have been marvelous. I wish I was going to graduate school.
Thank you.